If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. Your world, aka Mr. Harvey, has a saying: America was founded by thieves, slaves, and opportunists, and it's easy to guess which is which. Everyone who came to the United States by choice, they did not come here simply because it was an act of conscience. They came because they thought they saw a chance for a quick and easy come-up. Especially those who came from Europe. They've been told that there was a place where the principle had been established that whiteness would have tangible benefits. They didn't care if they had to cross the oceans, and they did. Didn't matter if they showed up without a penny to their name. Whiteness gave tangible benefits simply because you'd be given free land, other people's land. You would also have free status. It was a whole different ballgame, but we have to be honest about the fact that the same devil's bargain was also extended to other people. Groups who today are classified as people of color. There have been many of those who also showed up to see what opportunities they could get. And the society also gave them a number of tangible benefits, not as much as it gave to those who were classified as white, but as long as you weren't black, specifically didn't come here on those slave ships, well, there was going to be some measures of goodies, giveaways, and guarantees that would also be doled out. Now, we also have to make sure that we state for the record that there are a lot of places around the world that have practiced anti-black racism. Sure, it is most virulent and violent in the United States, but the U.S. hardly has a monopoly on anti-black racism. In fact, when you look at those countries south of the border, Latin America, you find that there is anti-black racism there. And a lot of the people who come to the United States bring those same racist traditions from down there up here. Now, I say all that because I think it's important that we lay the proper groundwork and have the right context for the heart of this evening's Sunday address. I posted for you on Twitter about an incident that had happened on last Friday in which you had State Assembly member of California, a woman by the name of Wendy Carrillo. And she's claiming that back in the 1950s in Los Angeles, you had this Mexican-American enclave in the area now known as Chavez Ravine, in which the city wanted to develop it differently. So the city used eminent domain in order to pay these people off and move them on so that they could make way for low-income housing. Now, apparently that project never moved forward, and so the voters eventually authorized a bill to sell the land to the Los Angeles Dodgers. And now Dodger Stadium sits where this Mexican-American enclave used to be. Now, the thing is, because of eminent domain, what that means is they got paid for that land. But apparently, this Carrillo woman's gripe is that it wasn't enough. So she's introduced legislation to the California legislature that, if passed, would not only provide reparations for the family members of those people who got moved out, and it would also authorize the construction of 3 community centers as well as the building of a monument acknowledging the history of Chavez Ravine. This is what happened on Friday. You didn't hear all that much about it, but I think you'll be hearing about it more as the months pass on. Now, this obviously is somebody who is trying to piggyback on what they have seen black Americans doing in California, as everybody looks and says, well, if black people are getting something, then everybody else needs to get more. Now, it needs to be known as this woman is talking about money. She says we are proposing various forms of compensation, including offering city-owned real estate comparable to the original Chavez Ravine landowners and providing fair market value compensation adjusted for inflation. You hear that? This woman's saying land, and most of all, she's saying money. That's important because we got some people who apparently don't understand what real reparations are. Apparently the Hispanics do, though. These Hispanic lawmakers, they're not asking for housing vouchers or for a little bit of money to go for some Latino colleges and universities, not that they have any. They're demanding money, and along with that, land. See, they didn't just demand land alone, they demanded money. Because without money, they'll wind up like the inheritors of Bruce's Beach, having to sell the land right back because they lack the means to develop it. So all the people who keep acting like trained parrots and saying, nah, man, we need land for reparations, man. Money ain't worth nothing, man. That dollar could lose all its value overnight. Land is where it's at, man. First of all, if the money does lose all of its value, how are you or anyone else going to live? Notice how you never see real estate moguls accepting land as payment. They want money. Secondly, crackhead talk like that sounds good to the ignorant, but for people who actually deal in the real world, we know how it actually works, and these Hispanics are showing you they know how it works too. Land is fine. There's nothing wrong with land. But Bruce's Beach should have taught everybody that it's a little bit more complicated than just getting some land. Other than as a place to live, land is useless if you don't have the means to develop it. Develop it means everything from using it for farmland to actually putting buildings on top of it. That's the point of actually having land, so that you can turn it into something that generates a revenue stream for you. But keep in mind, land is zoned. And if you live in an area where white zoning boards have decided that your land can't be developed, or that it can only be developed for specific things, then you'll find yourself with land that you can't do anything with. If you want to try to build some sort of community center on some land that you got, or you want to try to build some condominiums, but the zoning board has only zoned it for single-family dwellings, you're not going to be developing anything. See how that works? You'll find yourself with land that you can't do anything with, and then how will you be able to hold on to it? Let's put property taxes aside. Without money, how can you make the land become a source of revenue for you? You don't have land as a vanity project. You have it because the land generates revenue. That's what makes land valuable. It's amazing how many black people want to talk about reparations and don't understand that pig's simple reality. But this is what's going on in California right now, okay? And of course, before we go any farther, I think it also needs to be noted, you notice how this legislation went straight from one of these little activist groups directly to a California state lawmaker. See, they didn't have any situation where they're going, well, maybe there's somebody who might be able to look at it. We don't know about actually bringing this to a floor for a vote. No. They're sitting here going, let's go straight to the legislature with this. And notice how they're not talking about forming any study groups. See, with black people, they come up to us and, well, there needs to be a study group. There needs to be a study group. What they're saying is they need to have a framework for reparations. They're not sitting here saying, well, there needs to be a study group. Let's go ahead and have a study group. Let's look at it and let's study it. Let's study it. Now, they ain't saying study anything. Studying is for school. As far as they're concerned, give us the money. Notice that? So when they keep coming up to black people talking about, well, we'll have a vote on whether or not we will decide if there should be a study group or not. That's stuff that they only do with black people. With everybody else, it's, okay, well, how about this framework? How are we going to dole out this money? What's the apparatus that's going to be used? They ain't saying a word about studying. So for the black folks out there who are going, well, this is part of the process now. Part of the process. No, that's part of the process with black people. With everybody else, here's the check. Here's the money. That's how you know this is racial, but it's only against black people. Now, before we go any farther, let's go ahead and get the most obvious thing out of the way. Some people will try to say that there's a comparison between this claim by this Carrillo woman and what black Americans, the foundational black Americans, the descendants of American slaves reparations claim. There's no comparison. They're complaining about land that they were paid for. Their complaint is that the money they were paid wasn't enough. We're making a reparations claim because we were never paid at all. What comparison is there? Secondly, those areas were not entirely Mexican American. Even the white media articles admit that. But this Carrillo woman, she doesn't admit it at all. This was not something being done to them. They were simply in a location that the city wanted. Wrong place, wrong time. That's the reason why it didn't happen to them over and over and over again like it keeps happening to us. You compare what happened here with the experience of black Los Angelenos. Huh? Only black Americans were made slaves, no one else. And that slavery was also forced on every successive generation afterwards. You weren't just enslaved for a year or two and then let go. It wasn't something that only happened to you once in your life, but the other 77 years or so, we were just fine. Not to put too fine a point on it, but what this woman Carrillo's talking about, this is not a reparations claim, it's a real estate dispute. They're using the word reparations because everyone wants to piggyback off the momentum of our fight for true reparations. But what's happening here, if you try to make a comparison, that's when you're going to get maximum pushback from me. No, this is opportunism, plain and simple, compared to what it is that we're demanding. So as far as I'm concerned, there is no comparison. Also, when you have these migrants from Mexico or anywhere else who chose to come to the United States, especially in the 1950s, what, they didn't hear about the lynchings? Oh, that's right, that was happening only to black people. But what, they didn't hear about all of the racism going on in the U.S. in the 1950s? Of course they heard about it. Of course they knew. They knew exactly how racist the United States is, and they still kept coming anyway. You want to know why? That was up until about the late 1960s, Hispanics were officially classified as white. They only lost their white designation with President Nixon because too many brown-skinned people came into the U.S., and of course these white supremacists here, they would go ahead and play along with the game for a little while, but when they start seeing too many folks show up, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to have to go ahead and draw the line somewhere, which they did. And by the way, you have a lot of those folks still trying to get their white designation back. On driver's licenses, many, if not most, identify as white. Same thing with job applications, school applications, whole 9 yards. There are a lot who try to live their entire lives identifying as white, regardless of the fact that the dominant society says, no, you ain't white. So this Carrillo woman and the others who are supporting her, you notice how it is that they're doing this and nobody is paying any sort of tribute or respect to what black people are doing. She does not link this in any way to what it is that black Americans are doing out there in California, even though it was the movement that black people started out there and nationwide, shout out to Brother Tariq, that made it where she's looking and going, well, I think I see a space for us on this. You did not see her saying, hey, reparations for black Los Angelenos, for black Californians, it's an idea whose time has come. She gave no support to that. As far as she's concerned, hey, I'll go ahead and use what they're doing to see if I can benefit myself, but I'm not even going to say a thank you to them. And that's the reason for this evening's address. Miss Carrillo and her friends, they're demanding more money from the Dodgers Stadium land sale, and they're staying on code about it. They have made it very clear they're not going to mention anyone else, even though the white media points out in passing that the area there was not entirely Mexican-American. There were other folks there too. How much you want to bet that a lot of them were black? But you didn't hear Assemblywoman Carrillo mention any of them. She didn't mention any of them at all. There were far more people impacted by this than just Hispanics. But this woman, she's not mentioning any of them, and that's deliberate. She's trying to set a tone right off the bat. This is only going to go to one group, and she's not watering down her demands or diluting it or including anyone else. And if this sounds familiar to you, it should. You had that scandal on the Los Angeles City Council where Nury Martinez, along with a union representative and others, all of these people sitting here saying they wanted to make sure that the city only did things for Hispanics and the black people had gotten too much or didn't deserve to have anything. And you had a lot of people who were going out of their way to try to make some sort of kumbaya moment out of the aftermath of that. But only the black media reminded you, hold on, as ugly as what Nury Martinez and others were doing, keep in mind it was part of an overall attitude. This is part of what you see also in Latin America. And that being the case, it has to be part of the discussion. It's important. This woman tries to frame it as if, oh, she's talking about just an area where this happened, but she's doing the same thing that Nury Martinez did. She's talking about an area that even the white media has to admit was multiracial, but she makes sure that the words she uses and who she positions herself with, they make sure that they got a whole bunch of Spanish language back there, making it clear she's speaking for Hispanic residents and no one else. And this is the reason why the black media, those of us who work in the grassroots, we were talking about how you had all these people who consider themselves to be intersectionalists who managed to slither their way into our reparations discussion, and they make it a point to mention any and everyone else because they want to get attention from other people. They want to get affection from other people. But it's never reciprocal. Everyone has benefited from the struggles that we've waged. Every other group has enjoyed success because of the trails we blazed. Everyone tries to imitate us because we're the only ones who have stood and fought. We are the only ones who have provided a consistent centuries-long model for standing up to white supremacy and standing on your own 2 feet as you are. Everybody else tries to be either model minorities or they otherwise try to make themselves as white adjacent, and it doesn't work. So eventually, inevitably, when white supremacy reminds them of who they really are, decides it doesn't want to play nice, then all of a sudden everybody tries to look to us and say, hey, we're all in this together. But afterwards, everyone turns up their noses at us. We have had all these people the last few years sitting in on slavery reparations discussions groups. In fact, you've had black people on these reparations studies groups, and they were advocating reparations for everyone. They went out of their way to elbow us aside and say, this is bigger than just slavery. What about everyone else? And they start talking all of that faux socialist pap. Class struggle. Race is a social construct. We have to deal with the actual structure of the system. It's actually about class. You still have some fools running around the 21st century talking like that. It just goes to show they haven't updated their playbook. They haven't updated any of their talking points. Still repeating the same gibberish that they were back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know, H. Rap Brown said it best. The idea that our problem is class struggle, that is a delusion that black people cannot afford. And yet you got some fools still doing that mess. Now, here's my question. Those of you who are talking like that or otherwise giving your support to that kind of talk, okay, here's my question. If this Hispanic reparations claim moves forward, does anyone want to bet on whether they'll have Latinos in their meetings saying that black people need to be included too? Do you truly believe that when the white media says, well, that area out there, it was largely Mexican-American, but not just, you think they're talking about just white people or something? No, talking about black folks too, but you're not going to hear this Carrillo woman talking about black people. Will they have anyone saying, hey, it's about racism in general. We have to include the blacks too. We need a coalition. We need allies. We can't just have it about us. We got to make sure everyone's included. We don't want to discriminate. Is that what they're going to say? Will they even mention black people at all? Will they even mention Afro-Latinos? This is important because you've had a lot of black folks who have made it a point that when it comes time to talk about slavery reparations, they immediately want to try to enlarge it, magnify it, and turn it into something else. So, well, we got to make it about more than just slavery. Is that what you see this Carrillo woman doing? Or do you think they're going to make sure the conversation is specifically about them? They're going to keep it focused on them. They'll make sure not to discuss anyone else because we know that when other groups make a demand, they don't get the kind of pushback we get. In fact, when we get pushback, it comes from the groups who we also see saying that they've been done wrong in the past. And by the way, before we go any farther, let me go ahead and mention something that a lot of people probably haven't thought of. This little reparations claim that's going on in Los Angeles, it's about land that they were not paid what they wanted to be paid for it. But I think that right now what you're seeing is actually the thin end of the wedge. Do not be surprised when, not if, when. These same individuals that you're seeing, they're going to be demanding reparations on the basis that Hispanics in California in general are owed for the land because it used to belong to Mexico, and expect to see that brought up. Expect to see that said, because it's going to be. Today it's going to be about something in the 1950s, but they're going to be backtracking to that. It's not going to stop there. So before it's all said and done, you will see legislation being proposed in California that says the Hispanics in general who are in the state, they're owed something, even if their families never lived in California, and the vast majority of them didn't. Most of them, their families have been in Mexico since time immemorial, hadn't set foot in the United States till the 20th century. Nobody that they knew had either. But when it comes time to talk about there needs to be some sort of compensation for La Reconquista or what have you, expect for them to be saying that everybody who's there, why, we had been in Mexico but got pushed out. That's not what actually happened, but that's what they're going to be claiming. Expect to see that before it's all said and done. Notice how the white right, like Douglas Murray and others, they aren't losing their minds over this Carrillo woman's suggestion. They decry illegal immigration, but you'd think their heads would be exploding over this proposal, but they're not. And the white media is not calling it controversial either. They're not using the kind of disparaging language that they always use whenever black people are making a demand. And something else to consider, don't expect to see La Raza or Voto Latino or any other Hispanic race pride organization writing any letters or making any statements saying that they don't want cash reparations or cash reparations would be a bad thing. They're going to be on code because they don't have a bunch of bought and paid for sellouts who white supremacy planted among them like it did the black community. They don't have this phalanx of ready-made sellouts who the white media will readily give airtime to so they can fight against our interest. Carrillo's bill says that the city of Los Angeles would be responsible for paying these reparations. Now, I think that we should weigh in on that and object to our tax money going to pay people twice for land that they've already been paid for the first time. You don't see any of the Dodger Stadium people saying that black folks have been forced off our land in Los Angeles anywhere. You have a bunch of black neighborhoods in Los Angeles that no longer exist. They got appropriated through eminent domain, had highways run through them, gentrified out of existence. The black population was ethnically cleansed and replaced with a non-black population. Many of them people who Carrillo would know very well. No, Carrillo and her pals, they're advocating for themselves. But then again, everyone else has always done that, except for black people. We're the only ones who decide that we're going to be mouthpieces for everyone but ourselves, which is why it's not some victimless crime when you have some wannabe socialists talking about class struggle and acting like they're advocating for everyone else, when in reality, they're just hoping to get sexual access. And yes, it must be said that a number of the people who we see talking like that are also immigrants themselves. A lot of these people who you find out that they are at most second generation. So in their minds, they've got more in common with immigrants from south of the border than they do with us. So they don't have a problem with saying, oh, you need to include everyone else. Yeah, because they know that slavery reparations doesn't include them. So as far as they're concerned, let's make it about race. Let's not. Let's make it about the greatest crime in human history. It is not us being mean-spirited or divisive when we say that everyone will have to be their own advocate, and that we're not putting on the cape for anyone else. We are speaking up for ourselves alone because nobody else does. Nobody else speaks up for us at all. See, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the discussion. Thank you, Neely Fuller. And those who seek to find a comfortable place under white supremacy, they do the same. Everyone will see our struggle. They'll see us fighting for freedom, fighting for justice, but they'll then sit back and wait to see how it turns out. Now, if white supremacy successfully fends off our latest onslaught for justice, then these other groups will go ahead, smile, make nice with the dominant society, and then try to shame us and wag their finger at us. See, you Negroes, you people just don't understand society. But if, on the other hand, we make some progress, and we start making changes, if we successfully push our demands, then suddenly these other groups start to remember, hey, we're people of color. And that's where the opportunism that I mentioned earlier comes into play. So this is what's going on in California right now, and as I said before, as goes California, so goes the nation. Expect to see similar statements made by Hispanic lawmakers in Texas, probably in Florida, if DeSantis hasn't gotten them sufficiently intimidated, that is. But they're also going to be saying it probably in New York. You'll have Puerto Ricans saying similar things. But my question is whether or not the people who are out there deciding that they were going to advocate for everybody else, now that you've seen that when it comes time for other groups to advocate for themselves, they don't mention black people at all, are these people going to step forward now and say, you know what, I was talking like that, and it turns out that I was wrong. Okay, we understand why it was that you took the stance you were taking. Man, we really were wrong. Are they going to be saying that? Of course not. Because they also are opportunists. Except the opportunity they want is not for black empowerment, but rather for sexual access with anyone who isn't black. They can go ahead and pursue that. But I think as we're seeing in California, they're going to find out soon enough they're going to be in bed alone. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Wally Bilal, Jimmy Whitfield, Donna Cooks, Darren Nooks, and Jason Anderson. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.